and welcome to you all. This meeting this evening is on the Labour's green policies, or the lack of, you could say. Obviously, I don't need to explain to this meeting that we are facing an existential crisis in the world of climate change and the collapse in biodiversity and general pollution. It's clear. And the Tory party, even their moderate plans to rectify that have been sort of set aside, and Sunak is abolishing promises he hadn't even made. And equally, unfortunately, instead of taking advantage of this, Labour also seems to be, to some degree, backtracking on their own commitments in the past. And so really, as members of the Labour movement, we have to ask, what policies does Labour have, I guess, and what policies should they have? I'm really pleased to introduce Jamie Penquite-Green, who's a Labour movement activist from Cumbria. And so I would very much like to call her in and speak to you. How long do you need, Jamie?
I've not actually timed my notes, but I think maybe about 10, 15 minutes.
Okay, I'll let you know when you've had 15 minutes, and then we can take it from there. All right? So take it away, Jamie. I'll put you on spotlight. Hold on one sec. Oh, what's happened? That hasn't worked. Jamie, you've disappeared.
Am I there?
Now you're right. Now you should be on spotlight. Right. Okay. Off you go.
So I'm coming to you all from Mole, and I thought that my Wi-Fi was impeccable. Actually, I was out hiking today and I had 4G, and then I realized there was an O2 stand clear out on this peninsula that I was out walking on. I apologize. I am losing my voice. My dog ran off while we were out, and so I was shouting, trying to catch her. So this evening, we're talking on a socialist alternative that the Labour Party should be putting forward. As Ray described, the Tories are continuing to change around their net zero plans, which is basically to say they really didn't have a plan. Their plan is actually just to continue to line their pockets with big fossil fuels until they croak on a burning planet. So timely as ever, this conversation that we're having is right before Labour Party National Conference, and also 2023 COP28 that's taking place in Dubai at the end of November. So Labour essentially should be providing detailed, researched, and feasible alternatives to what the Tories are putting forward. Whether we see that or not remains to be seen. However, I'm going to speak just very briefly tonight about a snapshot of a just transition that I feel should be taking place within the Labour Party. Far too many mistakes and concessions are being made on purported or supposed financial frugality in the way of some imagined potential demographic that might be moved over from the Tory party that really either doesn't truly exist or has no interest in the well-being of the working class. 70% of the population believe that climate change is happening and is a result of human activity. And even that statistic, 61% of Tory voters do believe that as well. So with that in mind, with Labour's support for Rosebank, I find that it's entirely short-sighted. Coming back to where we're at, what would a just transition actually look like? So in part, this would look like publicly owned resources and services. So renationalizing of rail, for instance. So the privatization of rail in 1996, it's been a steady decline of it's been a steady slide of unmanaged decline with timetable chaos and cancellations, extortionate ticket prices, and failure to deliver on new rail projects, which essentially has driven people into feeling like they must have a vehicle, which again accrues debt and also climate impact. The UK rail service is Europeans' worst. I would say that renationalizing rail service would help it be more cost effective. It would be more accessible for working class people. That would provide a viable alternative to owning vehicles. I don't really want to go in so much about conversations about electric cars and their lifespans or on batteries, simply because most of those are truly inaccessible in terms of cost to working class people, which is why I think that, if anything, Labor should focus predominantly on renationalization of rail to provide that alternative. Side by side with that, it should come with a viable program for integrated and efficient, adequate scrapping scheme for those vehicles that no longer are able to meet the recommended limits. Renationalizing of energy in terms of reaching net zero, the limits on 2025, 2030, 2050, investments in renewables and non-fossil fuel energy production is a must. It wouldn't cost trillions, despite what a recent redacted pamphlet had to say from a right-wing think tank. This had basically estimated, trying to say that it would be 4.5 trillion pounds to reach net zero emissions. This is simply not true. The Climate Change Committee had recently said that while it would generate costs, it would also generate savings and lower fossil fuel bills worth upwards of 1.1 trillion pounds. Realistically, this would result in a cost of 0.3 trillion pounds. Renationalizing water in general, I wrote down water because so much of the last year we've heard about privatized water companies that are being allowed to dump tens of thousands of raw sewage into rivers and into beaches. Is generally just along the lines of ecology in general, but water companies across England and Wales are also now wanting to raise their water prices £156 by 2030 to fund improvements. So the idea, this goes along with the whole idea of privatization being the thing that is going to help maintain either water or energy or rail. It's a lie that should have died with Thatcher, and unfortunately it didn't. Specifically within water, we see 72 billion pounds that have been awarded to shareholders in dividends. So renationalizing the water would guarantee several things: money not going to shareholders, maintenance of infrastructure, which could actually look to create jobs in terms of that it's not being done now. This would provide with upkeep and reduce of water waste as well as pollution. A just transition in terms of housing. So part of that transition would be to introduce rent controls and implement massive investment in public housing provision. We have 27 million homes that need to be retrofitted. This is within the existing housing stock. This would improve energy efficiency for the working class, which would help reduce the cost on the working class, particularly in the winter, which would reduce the impact on the NHS during the winter. This would help with performance and compliance. The jobs that could be created alone from this, training and utilizing internship programs like those historically that we've had that have been gotten rid of for houses that are built now and retrofitting, but also in how they can be built in the future. This would also include council housing. It would ensure green jobs that are sustainable for working class people to ensure that transition into a green economy, while also providing a basic human right, which is housing. Pardon me. I was going to talk about roads and maintenance, but again, that goes into something I'd much rather Labor focus on, things like renationalizing the rail. How does this look? And so that's just basically a snapshot of some of the policies that Labor could hold. How does this look in terms of motions in the membership and in terms of the upcoming Labor Party National Conference? So in recent years, outside of the Socialist Green New Deal, we've seen 4 Green New Deal composites that were unanimously passed that have come with support from unions. We've seen motions on public services. We've seen motions on public ownership. Also in terms of climate crisis, on supporting immigrants, asylum seekers, and opposing the Nationality and Borders Bill. Unfortunately, this is a conversation that we have to have in terms of climate crisis. Labor has to sort themselves out to help support people that are seeking refuge from climate crisis and other things. Motions on the NHS, which would go towards climate crisis. The homes in Britain are not prepared for increasing global temperatures in the UK. They're not. So you have more extreme weather, you have more natural disasters. Cumbria alone has seen more than enough of its fill of once-in-a-lifetime floods, which will result in an impact on the NHS. So protecting the NHS is also part of a green transition, a just transition. You have to have access to that basic right of healthcare. Now, despite of all these things of what Labour should be doing, all the backturns that we've seen, most recently Labour's alignment to an agreement to uphold Rosebank in the North Sea, I think even with, as I speak to working class people, mostly around Cumbria, but even with them asking, what is Stormer doing in terms of the
I don't know if you can hear me, Jamie, but you've frozen there.
Labour takes power. Sorry, I think I've frozen. No, I
You
haven't.
froze for about 10 seconds or so, yeah.
It's when Labour takes power that things will start to open up. It's a matter of what the working class does, what activists do, and what trade unionists do in that time. What we can discern beyond the backtracking, wish-washy responses is that basically reformism will still rule the roost. This will be in the form of neoliberalism, neo-Blairism. I don't know if anybody caught Rachel Reeves completely disagreeing with herself on trickle-down economics. It takes a pretty special person to weather that interview. But the consequences of that, I sat and thought to myself, what are some, I can't really articulate the consequences, even outside, not just in terms of not fighting climate crisis, but in terms of those who are found to not be fighting it, those who are found to be standing in the way of climate crisis and justice for the working class, because they are indistinguishable from one another. My generation, I'm a millennial, I'm 33, Gen Z, they are that generation. They are, in terms of trade unionism, despite trade union membership not really recovering from the 80s, which I don't think, you can't solely place that on the younger generation for not understanding the value of trade unions, but more so, those numbers have halved since the 1980s, right? A lot of that has come from anti-trade union laws in the UK, employer policy changes, propaganda, really strong propaganda and rhetoric, and a mild appeasing to the working class through employers. Gen Z are, well, I'd read an article and I was reading again talking about that they are the most pro-union generation. Last year, there was an upsurge and in interest. It was 1 in 10 who were not non-union workers who were interested in joining. I would be interested to revisit that, considering you've had the writers' strike in the US, you now have automotive strike and the wave strike across the UK. They are a generation, as someone once coined it, a generation of very few fucks left. They are the generation that was made up 30% of the great quitting wave in the UK this last.
Frozen again.
Might be worth turning off the video.
Maybe. Are you coming back, Jamie? We've lost her completely.
Disadvantage of being in Mull.
No, she's there.
Yes. Ah, good.
So sorry. Can you hear me?
We can. Okay.
Okay.
You were just talking about Gen Z there, and we lost you. So if you go back to that bit, you said they don't give any Fs anymore, and they're very much into joining unions.
They're more likely to be directly confrontational whether through protest, through social media, and most recently that we've seen is through litigation. So in Montana, there was a coalition of youth climate activists who won a landmark lawsuit. This is Held v. Montana, related to climate change that exempted fossil fuels permitting from consideration of greenhouse gas output. The district court ruled in favor of them that it violated their right under Montana Constitution to a clean and healthful environment. The European Court of Human Rights is now hearing a case from Portuguese youth. This is young people aged 11 to 24 that are naming 32 European nations, including the UK, that their inaction, these governments' inaction on climate crisis, breaches their human rights and discriminates against young people. The irony that Starmer is a human rights lawyer is not lost on me in this point. So for me, it's foreseeable that Labor will get into power in spite of clarity or lack thereof around climate crisis policies and what they should be doing, in spite of the pass given to the Tory approval of Rosebank and in spite of their turnaround on other policies. It's a matter of what the working class, particularly the younger generations, are willing to do, will drive into politics when that comes to fruition, and that an action in political education across trade unions must remain in our focus moving forward. I don't know if that was 15 minutes, but that's me.
That was exactly 14 minutes. So well done. Thanks very much, Jamie. That's I'll take you off spotlight now. You can relax a bit. Thank you very much. I'll open that. I mean, it's very clear that we don't in these meetings, we don't always insist on people making long speeches. You can just, make a contribution for 30 seconds or for, or just ask a question. And then, if you make short speeches initially, then you can come back and have another go. But if you make a very long speech, you won't. So let's make a sort of real dialogue of it if we can.